Water underpins every aspect of human and environmental existence. And just a few days ago, the Department of Water and Sanitation launched its National Water Week and Water Month. And these activities are to be celebrated in collaboration with various governmental departments, district municipalities, private companies, academia, and community members. And the theme of this Water Week or Water Month is groundwater, making the invisible visible. Stay with us for more, and we're going to be having a conversation with the South African Water Chamber, Dr. Anthony Turton, Fred Platt, Benoit, and Professor Hamanth Kasan. Don't go away, we'll be right back. If you've just joined us, then welcome to the Water Hour. I'm Bridget Mbanda from Cape Town in South Africa, and this live stream is brought to you by Be Live Media and the Water Chamber. This is an audience-centric show, so feel free to say hello in the comments. If you've got a question for our panel today, please feel free to comment. Our panel is the South African Water Chamber, Dr. Anthony Turton. We're hoping that Fred Platt will join us. Benoit is in the studio, and so is Professor Hamanth Kasan. Let's welcome them to the conversation. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have you here. So we had the Minister of Water gave a speech just recently, and perhaps we could take a look at what it is that he said. What is the key takeaways from that? And where are we in reality? Benoit, can I ask you to just kick us off with what were some of the key takeaways for you?
Thanks, Bridget, and hello to our viewers. To me, what was quite good was acknowledging and using the word crisis. Whether there is or not the word is being used, and the irony is that the dams are full, as the minister said, but folk are still battling to get water, and there's some people who've never had water. But if you have a look at it, I think the minister was really highlighting the issue in that we are not very effective in getting our water through to the users. So and I think that's a truth, especially if you're living in small to medium towns, but also in Johannesburg. The city of Johannesburg is suffering huge infrastructure failures, and it's really frustrating when you don't have water for 3, 4, 5 days. And I have friends and family who've been having this problem for several years. It's not brand new. So I think water is becoming a very topical issue. It is hot on the minds of the politicians because it was the top 5 out of 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of voters in the municipal elections, top issues. So it relates to, failing of basic services and the likes. So I think we're not in denial. We know what the problems are and the likes. And I think the minister is really looking at what do we do? How do we reinvigorate? And the summit that was pulled together a couple of weeks ago worked on those solutions. And I think he put on the table the topic of groundwater. And, whilst I firmly believe that we need a diversified mix of water resources, groundwater is not a silver bullet. And in actual fact, in South Africa, Limpopo specifically and KZN, already 30 years ago, we ran out and we drew all the water out. We had to wait for good rains. So it's not it's a renewable resource as long as we have rain, and we know that this can sometimes be elude us as it is in Eastern Cape. So there's no doubt we can better use our groundwater, but it has limited yields. So there's not going to be a big fanfare in countries where there's a lot of rain. So let's say 3, 4, 5 times our rain, like in Central Europe, their groundwater is 60% of their mix. It's probably different. It's recharged every year by two things: rain and melting snow. So I think the groundwater, I can't remember the numbers. Maybe Tony will know it better, or Hamanth, but we I think in the 10 to 15% of our water resources groundwater, and we can probably squeeze a little bit more on average, but I don't think that much more. One thing we do need to do with the groundwater, and it's been brought up, is that it has to be managed. It has to be regulated, because if everybody sinks a borehole, soon you're going to need 300-400 meters to get to it, like they found out in the Karoo, if everybody's drawing unlimited amounts. So water's complicated, it's complex, it's erratic, but I think it's good that we've got this Water Week. It really raises awareness. The media have really been good compared to a couple of years ago before the pandemic. I think the intensity is much higher, not only in South Africa, but globally. It's and everybody's meeting. I think it's in Ghana this week, all the big guys. So the Water Week is important. Water is becoming a daily story, in that we need to be aware of it. So from my perspective, it's a good week for us in the water sector.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Benoit. Hamanth, what was your key takeaways from what the minister said?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brigetti, and afternoon to the viewers and listeners, so to say. Indeed, I think that, on the one hand, as Benoit has indicated, groundwater is a resource. It's one tactical move amongst others. So you have a mix of resources, and the essence of what we should be striking in this country is to have and execute a seasoned water security plan, an approach that has the proper mix of groundwater, recycling, surface water, and any other sources of water that we can use in order to ensure that we have, one, enough water, and two, the proper quality of water. Those are the two key aspects around water security, and kind of ensuring that your future of water supply is being managed and being planned for appropriately. The challenge, however, is at this point in time during Water Week, which is an appropriate time for us to have this important conversation, our challenge is not the amount of water that we have in the dams. Our challenge is the ability to transform that water through water utilities and then municipalities in order to reticulate it on a 24/7 basis for sustainable supply. That's where our key challenge lies. And our challenge is largely in the utilities and the municipalities for many, many reasons, most of which we are well familiar with. And it's those challenges that we need to overcome to ensure that water supply is not intermittent. Intermittent water supply is not a feature of this country. Historically, South Africa was never classified as a country that had intermittent water supply. India, for example, is a country that traditionally had intermittent water supply, which means you would have water supply for some 3 to 4 hours a day, and people would have tanks, lots of tanks on their roofs, and they would store the water. So you would shower, and the water would be coming from the tank, and you wouldn't realize that you're actually not being supplied with water from the municipality, but through the storage in the tank. Now, South Africa has never been in that category. South Africa has had a track record of having 24/7 supply, especially in most of the metro areas. This is what we need now to focus on. What are the challenges? How quickly are we going to ameliorate these challenges to ensure that we have continuous water, but not only continuous water, but safe water, so that people are not concerned about diseases like typhoid, cholera, or any other waterborne disease or any other pollutant which may create a challenge for water consumers. Thank you.
Thanks for your take on that. Appreciate it. Anthony, if I can ask you, so one of the things the minister mentioned is that he says municipalities need to acquire technically skilled personnel. Do we really have a shortage of skilled personnel? I know this is a topic that's very close to your heart and also for Hamanth.
Yes, Brigitte, I'll gladly answer that question, but can I please just deflect for 1 second, if I might, and just to, you asked the other speakers to reflect on what the minister's speech was about. So can I please just comment on that, and then I'll get back to your question.
Sure, sure.
To me, the real big eye opener about the minister's speech was the fact that he talks about coming down hard on polluters. The sad reality in South Africa is that the state is the biggest polluter of its own water. With municipal failure across the country, one of the biggest single sources of pollution in the country, and I say this without fear of contradiction, is municipal wastewater discharge. It happens across the entire country, and the municipality is responsible for that. So the state is the biggest single polluter of water. And if you look at the volumetric flow of pollution, particularly from wastewater works, I'm referring here now to return flows that do not meet the required legal standard. It is orders of magnitude bigger than acid mine drainage flows in this country. Orders of magnitude bigger. So we get excited about a little bit of acid mine drainage, but we tend to forget about this massive amount of wastewater. But that to me was the real take-home thing. Now, just to get back to your question about the skills shortage, the reality is that South Africa's got a highly skilled water sector, and we've got a highly skilled, technologically advanced society, or we certainly were until at least a decade ago. We still have remnants of that left in the country. We are busy deindustrializing at a rapid rate, but we still do have skills available. And I always find it somewhat amusing when a typical politician speak is, the problem that we're facing is really just a budgetary constraint. All we need to do is add another R1 billion and we're going to fix the problem up. You can add as much money as you want to without having the institutional setting and the proper skilled people to do what has to be done. Now, you can add as much money as you want to, it's just not going to make a difference. So to me, that was the take-home message that I got from the minister's talk.
Thanks for sharing that. And Hamanth, can I ask you to comment on that as well? I'm sure you must have strong feelings about the idea that we have a technical shortage in the country.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the opportunity. We have, water is a complex subject, and it requires a range of different skills. Typically, we need scientific, engineering, management, leadership, corporate governance skills, strong technical skills at the operator level, especially amongst the municipalities, etc. Now, whilst there are pockets of excellence, and there used to be many more pockets of excellence in South Africa traditionally, but let's look to the future. I don't know that we are using the skills that we currently have in the country in the best way that we should be using these skills. I think that I was told just this morning on another conversation that there's in the region of in excess of 3,000 water graduates in this country that are not able to find jobs. So we are generating graduates. The quality of graduates is something we need to look at. We need the appropriate programs to transform these graduates into effective and efficient employees amongst the municipalities and the utilities where their skills are needed the most. And then most importantly, despite having skills, despite having funds, there are a few key ingredients that the international community has demonstrated that are essential to shift and improve water service and sanitation service delivery. One of this is very strong political will. You need strong political will, you need leadership, and we need very strong governance. The folk that lead all of these key institutions in the country have to be the best in the country. And in that way, I think we can begin to get more movement. There are signs, no doubt, from the Department of Water Affairs and the minister in particular. With the permanent appointment with the DG, I'm given to understand that there'll be a permanent DDG or more soon. These are positive steps, but this is a long process because a few people don't necessarily make the huge difference. You need a critical mass of expertise that has capability for them to undertake what needs to be undertaken and for them to surround themselves with the right expertise so that we can get. So the short answer to your question, yes, I think we do have skills. We may be short in some areas, but I do believe we can generate them. But most importantly, I do believe that we ought to review how we're using these skills and perhaps remobilize these skills so that they are concentrated in the areas of priority so that we make some progress. Because, success breeds success. And if we can have 2 or 3 quick wins, I do believe that this country will move at a very rapid pace. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. And one of the other things that the minister also touched on is water loss, and particularly he mentioned the Northwest Province. Benoit, would you like to give us a comment on that?
So we're good at losing ourselves in detail. So we lose 41% of our water. I've been to a few smaller municipalities who are producing their own water and the likes, and they way above 50%. And so what they're saying is we're not getting the water through to the town and to the suburbs and to the prison and to the hospital and to the factories. So we're going to put bigger pumps the private sector is going to fund. And we just stop that in their tracks, because all you're going to do is increase the leaks. So we have a leaking bucket. It's the world has a leaking bucket, but ours is double the world average. And we compared to let's say mature economies where water is available 24/7. It has been for nearly 100 years, so why should it be now? So we compared with the best, and in rugby we beat the best. So why can't we do it in water? And we still say that our Water Research Commission is in the top 20 in the world, and the likes, and the water quality out of rainwater is tops in the world, and all this. So we can do it. So the non-revenue water is one of the 3 big parallel priorities in the National Infrastructure Plan 2050 that 2 weeks ago Cabinet approved. And we are going to hold Cabinet accountable. Then when we say we as a country, we as a society need to do that. We have to demand accountability, not by burning tires or anything. Demand accountability. Just do what you're paid to do. So the non-revenue water is, before we add any new water to the system, we've got to renew our assets, and we have to drive the non-revenue water down. And it's the majority, 95% of it is leaks. So it's physical losses. And that means we've got to replace the infrastructure. That means we've got to spend more money on water services. Well, if you don't spend for 25 years, it catches up. Ask Eskom. It catches up if you don't keep your power station service. So we have a similar issue, but we also have, I think, an ideal opportunity, because the economic multiplier in this is about 3 up to 4 maximum. So for every billion rand that's in there, there's 3 to 4 billion rand being injected into the economy, and the economy needs that kickstart. So water is one of the 4 pillars in the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, the NIT 2050 we call it. And non-revenue water is our utmost top priority whilst we develop other water resources for a healthy resource mix. And those take a bit of time to do. But addressing this, and the tools to address this, is there's a primary tool. And it's not replacing the pipe, because Cape Town doesn't have 60 billion rand to replace its piping infrastructure. That's what it costs. They don't have it. Joburg doesn't have it. I mean, that's the turnover of the city. Their budget is just over that. So what we have to do is digitize the water sector. It is the fastest growing subsector globally. In South Africa, naught, nada, zero. And that is about to change at the Water Summit that was pushed very hard by both public and private sector. We have to digitize the infrastructure so that we can manage it more efficiently, and it can also guide us as to where we need to reduce pressures, replace sections of pipes that are the most notorious and the likes. And it's not just about age, it's about failures per kilometer per year. And you replace them, managing our reservoirs better. A lot of them are leaking, taking them offline, using alternatives. If you don't digitize that, it's like trying to use an analog telephone to replace your mobile smartphone. Just can't do it. You need a smartphone to communicate these days. You have to have a smartphone to communicate if you're trying to run a business. We have to do the same with water. And the returns we are seeing are typically 6 to 8 months, purely by the impact of reducing the leaks. The long-term win is that you don't lose your water. So we've got about, the water that's leaking is roughly 8 to 10 million people's worth of water. So if you look at that, we can't bring it down to naught. We can bring it down to 10, 15%, and that would take probably 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, but we can bring it down from, let's say the physical leaks are 37%. We can bring it down to 25% in less than 5 years. And that we can do just through digitization and then focusing on the assets that are the worst performing within that. So from that perspective, and these are new jobs, new skills, and there's a lot of precedence globally, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all available, and it's in actual fact very well traded. So we're going to see a lot more of that happening, but it can't happen at national level. This is local government's mandate. So if you look at the water utilities, they're generally speaking losing 5 to 10%. Those are their losses. But it's 5 to 10% of a pretty big bulk pipeline. But it's fairly well managed by the big utilities. The cities at 35 to 41% is unacceptable, and that's where the action has to happen. And I don't know why we don't hold the councillors. To me, our councillors are all full of excuses, and they're earning 500,000 rand a year. And generally speaking, they tend to be either very young or very old and retired, and this is pocket money. And I have had endless disputes with the councillors. They're accountable to nothing, and the councillors have to take this to the council and make it a priority, and no excuses, just get it done. Let's get the non-revenue water working, and in Gauteng, it's on average 35 to 38%, totally unacceptable. We have to work on that. There is no excuse for that. There's only ignorance and ineptitude. There is no excuse. So I think we're going to see a big driver, and I do know that some of the bigger water utilities are in natural fact forcing pressure demand management onto their customers, and the municipalities are now kicking back. Okay, they don't want to be held accountable. We've got to work. We all work for our money, so we have to work hard. We have to force this accountability, this governance, but also the provinces at DWS and national are really the regulator at the moment, the custodians, and that function has to become independent, so that we force the municipalities to perform and to go from bad to medium to top class. And we have to do that because that's where the economy is driven. And right now, it ain't a pretty picture.
Thanks, Benoit. Hamanth, can I ask you for a comment?
Sure. So one of the unintended consequences of this non-revenue water that Benoit is talking of is, if you're losing in the region of 1/3 of your water, which is leaking to the ground, this is top quality water that has been treated, and it comes at a price. So firstly, people are not receiving it. Secondly, people are paying for it. And thirdly, the need to augment water supply, in other words, the need to build infrastructure for you to keep up with supply for a 3% growth rate, so to say, you're spending money that you shouldn't need to spend because your water is leaking down in the ground. Now we have an additional challenge in South Africa. If you look at all the water augmentation systems that we're trying to execute, most of them are delayed by 3 to 4 years at the project level. So not only are we not able to execute timeously, we might be spending money we obviously should not be spending, and we should rather focus our energy to having the private sector come in and mitigate the leak situation so that we don't have to spend capex in the future to augment the water supply. Of course, we have an associated problem as well, which is the per capita use of water in South Africa is higher than the national global number, so to say. And oftentimes we tend to ask people to reduce the water usage because the use is higher. My own contention would be we should first fix the 30-odd% that's leaking before we ask people to reduce their usage, or do both simultaneously. But it would be wrong for us to put pressure on citizens to reduce water by half, for example. In the meanwhile, we're not fixing the water that's going down the drain. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Tony, and can I ask you for a comment on that?
Yes, when we're talking about non-revenue water, there's actually it's a complicated issue, because it's not only are we spending money on it, but more importantly, the municipality is not generating revenue out of it as well. So it costs money on the one hand, and it also means that you can't recover that money, or that you can't generate money for to do other things. So it's a complicated thing. And I would like to also just put a question to the panel about when South Africa is often accused of having one of the highest water consumptions per capita in the world. I'm not sure that I buy into that argument. And the reason why I don't buy into it is because we've got such a high level of non-revenue water. You probably find that non-revenue water is also factored into the per capita consumption. So if you take your total consumption, for example, in a given metro or given municipality, divided by the population, you're then going to get a very high water capita use, simply because a significant portion of that goes into non-revenue water. So I'm personally biased against pointing the finger of blame at the individual citizen. We can't blame them for all the ills of the country. They are the customers that we should be servicing. They are the people on whose revenue the utilities are dependent. We must look after them rather than demonize them. That is my position on the matter.
Thanks very much for that. Now, Benoit, you were saying that we need to reinforce the usage issue. Did you have another comment on that?
Yeah, I struggled to find the truth until I was part of an editorial team for a publication that will come out very soon. And unfortunately, they've been using the losses in the calculation and trying to hit the consumer on the head, as Tony says. So that's a fact. And I appear to be the first one to have picked it up. And this is a primary edit. It's the first time on the editorial team. But, you know, I love numbers because, you know, the world revolves around numbers and mathematics and ratios and all the likes. And if you just look at the basic numbers, I could not find how we could use so much more than other people. And we've been water scarce forever, you know, so it's not true. But that false narrative was never challenged by anybody. And so that's been put right. And if the publication doesn't put it right, I will publicly remove myself from that editorial team because that means the publication is captured, which I don't believe it is. Now, that's going to unleash quite a lot of backlash because we've had many politicians stating this, and you'd think the politicians and advisors were fed the correct numbers. So now I'm asking myself, do we have the right skills within these departments to do that? Because the mass balance we use to calculate the non-revenue water is I think it's a World Bank or International Water Association one, Hamanth. I think it's one of the two. It's a global tool. It's very easy to use. And what it does is it puts in the practical, the perceived loss and all the likes. And it talks about volumes and it talks about revenue and all that. So, and some of the most obtuse and inefficient and inept municipalities managed to put it together. And some of the worst run metros managed to put it together. So those numbers are all around. We understand that mass balance, okay? Because you get bulk water from A and you distribute to B and C goes and pays. And those meters tally up. So that mass balance works. So there's definitely we are not. And in actual fact, I did the calc, we're in actual fact just below the world average, okay? And I think we'll probably find our non-revenue water numbers, the 41%, we'll probably find it's probably 10% more. And until somebody can prove that it isn't, okay? I think it's a lot more. But the problem is it's very high, we know, and they stopped reporting. It's in the smaller municipalities, the rural municipalities. And it's extremely high, up to 70-odd% we've seen in Northwest Limpopo and Nelspruit and Mpumalanga and the likes. We've seen over 70% of the water. And these are municipalities where virtually nobody pays. It's free water. So it's completely subsidized by our national fiscus. So yeah, as we dig, the devil's in the detail, and I do not believe that we can save much water ourselves. I, in actual fact, think that we are pretty good. And I think in Cape Town, it went a little bit overboard, but it had to. It's normalizing, again. And water's become a fairly important part of our wallets. And, we are paying the majority. There's 40% of us who are paying the water, but for water, 60% aren't paying for it. But if you have a closer look at it, you'll find it's probably a quarter of that who are paying 80 to 90% of the water bill with industry. And industry is not that big a user. So if you have a look at that, and agriculture pays very little, but that it subsidizes most parts of the world because we need food security. As a GDP value add, it's a very, very low number. So it's the households that are actually footing the bill. And as a person like me who lives in a metro, I have a big problem paying for the other 85% of the country, and I'm not overusing the water. And we are paying a lot more. I mean, in Joburg, it's up to 40-odd rand a cubic meter, a lot more than Cape Town, and industry is also paying that. And so, yeah, we need to be conscious and wise about it. But like Tony said, the biggest polluter are the municipalities with the non-functional sewage works. They're also the biggest culprits of leaking infrastructure. So let's hold our councils accountable. Okay, and let's make all the councillors volunteers. Okay, like we used to have until such time as they deserve a penny. Because to me, they deserve nothing. Okay, we can pay for the civil servants, but the councillors and the likes, no, should be part-time. They're not doing their job anyway, so it should be part-time. Let's generate jobs in the right place with the right people.
Love your passion, Benoit.
and I'm getting upset, so I'll stop.
Yes, let's keep this clean. Anthony, can I ask you for a comment, please?
Yes. What comment on what?
I think you
My
were.
heartbreak.
Okay, Brigitte, you were supposed to cue me up there, but you didn't cue me up. You didn't. Okay, but nonetheless, I will come in on. I will come in at this moment in time. Yes, I wanted to comment on another thing that the minister said in his famous speech on World Water Day, and that is this whole thing about groundwater. I noticed with some trepidation this thing about groundwater, and I'm going to give you some facts. Facts are always our friends. I was a senior fellow at the CSIR. I left the CSIR in 2008, where one of the roles that I fulfilled was I was the vice chairman of the research advisory panel, the RAP, and part of my responsibility was overseeing the parliamentary grant money for the National Water Research Program. And a significant part of that National Water Research Program in 2008 was the Atlantis Aquifer. And the Atlantis Aquifer had been studied ad infinitum for at least a decade, maybe two, at that point in time. And they'd still not done anything with this vast body of knowledge about the Atlantis Aquifer. Now, all of a sudden, many years later, decades later, they suddenly rediscover this groundwater resource that's now going to be a magic silver bullet. Now, let's get back to a bite of the reality sandwich, the ugly, hard facts of the matter. Now, the hard facts of the matter are as follows. Number one, you can't create water that doesn't exist in the first place. So groundwater, all groundwater is recharged by rainfall. If you don't have a lot of rainfall, then you cannot have a lot of groundwater, with the one exception. And that one exception is found in very precise locations under some of the biggest deserts of the world. So under the great Nubian sandstone aquifer underlies the Sahara Desert. Well, guess what? That aquifer was recharged 10,000 years ago by rainfall events, 10,000 years ago. So it's also rainfall recharged, but a long time ago. So if you haven't got good rainfall, then you can't have a good sustained yield from an aquifer. You can have a short-term yield, but not a sustained yield. That's fact number one. Fact number two is South African geology is generally not conducive to high-yielding aquifers, with some exceptions. And there is always an exception to the rule. And the general exception to the rule in South Africa is we happen to have some of the largest karstic aquifer structures in the world. So we've got a massive karst structure that goes all the way from Ramotswa in Botswana. It's a dolomitic aquifer system, goes down through Kuruman. Kuruman Oog is part of that same system. It goes down through Rustenburg Post, Magaliesberg. Maloney's Eye is part of that thing. It goes into Randfontein. The fontaine in Randfontein comes from that system. It goes to the Sierbekom aquifer system that Randwater gets some of its water from still to this day. And it goes all the way around south of Johannesburg, Lens. And then it goes to Springs on the East Rand. Springs from that same dolomitic aquifer system. And then it swings around back to Pretoria. And it goes all the way up to one of the famous aquifers, Rietvlei Dam area. There's a massive aquifer. That's all one massive aquifer. And that is a dolomitic structure. And that is a very precisely defined structure. That's a high yield structure, but all of the other structures in general, the geology is simply not conducive to high yield aquifers in South Africa, because we in general, and I'm generalizing now, have got hard basement rocks close to the surface. So we in general do not have fractured aquifers. Therefore, in most cases, our aquifers are generally low yield. This is the simple reality of groundwater in South Africa. It's an important, a very, very important resource for rural communities and for agriculture, very important. But in terms of the national water strategy, the national water mix, it is so complicated to drill thousands of boreholes, not hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of boreholes have to be drilled all across the landscape. Each one has to be equipped with an electric cable. Electric cables get stolen in South Africa. It's got to be equipped with a pump. It's got to have a controller on it. Someone's got to turn it on and off. It's got to now be piped through a small bore pipe into a bigger bore pipe into a big reticulation system to supply a municipality in the opposite direction, in the wrong direction to where the natural flow normally goes. So from a logistics perspective and an infrastructure perspective, it is extremely difficult to actually manage these things properly. So I'm afraid to say we're clutching at straws when it comes to the groundwater thing. And in fact, there's another underside to the story that is very, very sad. And that is that I read this last week that it is the French, I believe, that are now putting money into the South African groundwater exploitation, where until very recently, South Africa had world-class geohydrologists and hydrogeologists that were highly sought after all over the world. And because we didn't fund them in places like the CSIR, because we didn't fund them properly in the Council for Geosciences, they eventually could not sustain themselves. So we've lost some of that capacity now, and that speaks to this whole skills shortage that we went about today as well. Now, the bottom line is that the more we rely on foreign donor aid to sustain the core skill that we have been world leaders in up until recently, the more we're going to continue to lose those skills. And this, I'm afraid, is the double-edged sword. This is the tragedy of skills lost in South Africa. Back to you.
Thanks very much for that. Hamanth, do you have another comment on this groundwater issue? It's a burning issue, and
Look, with Tony making the kind of comments that he does, it will begin to demonstrate our age, because we go back to the early days of the CSR, and in the days when we had some of the best, the hydrologists, etc., at the CSR, and even in fact at the Department of Water Affairs. So groundwater is not a new issue. Okay, we've known about groundwater in this country and globally. So it is a solution, but it is not the silver bullet. There are applications where you can use it, as indicated, like in deep rural areas, etc., dependent on the fact that there'll be sufficient yield from those boreholes in order to have some sustainability of supply. My contention still is that we should go for some of the lower hanging fruit. And I think that the three quick wins that this country can strive toward in the water and sanitation space One of them would obviously be this non-revenue water situation. And here's a huge role for the private sector. If you can reduce that from an average of 35 to 20%, that's a huge, huge victory, even at 20%. And many countries have gone below 20%. I can quote you, for example, Uganda, which is well below 20%, because they've put in a concerted effort to be able to do this, this non-revenue water reduction process. The second issue that I think that is a low-hanging fruit is the pollution, which is receiving attention in terms of the speeches we're hearing and the focus area. And traditionally, the approach to pollution, you know, in the global space is that the solution to pollution is prevention. So we need to prevent this pollution. And as rightly as has been said, this pollution is mainly from municipal wastewater treatment works. So we need an intervention that's not going to take 5 to 10 years in order to rehabilitate this wastewater treatment works. That's too long in order for us to survive with that level of pollution. The impact will be really dire. So we need an intermediate solution. One of these intermediate solutions that, you know, I would suggest going forward is some of the innovative non-sewage sanitation technologies that are coming forward. This means that we don't necessarily have to waste water or overly use water for purposes of sanitation, or we could recycle water for the use of sanitation, which again will have a key impact and will alleviate the strain on some of these overused and old and, you know, not well maintained wastewater treatment systems. The third issue I would highlight is the notion of governance. And here I must say, you know, the positive indication I get from the minister when I listen to the speeches is that he's committed to appoint the best people for the job. This is a key start. The best people in the best positions, the best people for the boards of all the utilities. The governance process has got to be run by the correct, ethically based people so that they work in the interest of the South African consumer to overcome this water challenge in the country. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Hamanth. Before I wanted to move on to desalination, but Anthony, have you got another comment there?
Yeah. Just to follow the theme that Hamanth has raised there about his opinion about low-hanging fruit. I fully concur with what he said there, but I would also like to just add what I think the low-hanging fruits are. I think, to me, the biggest low-hanging fruit with the biggest bang for your buck in the shortest possible time is the recovery of water from waste. So in other words, we have to recapitalize our sewage sector, and let's recapitalize it with water recovery technology. And once we've done that, you now start to recycle your water. We only have to recycle our total national water resource 1.3, 1.4 times by 2030 plus minus, and we're in a good place then. Okay, so I would say that's the first low-hanging fruit, looking at recovery of water from waste. And the second logical low-hanging fruit is something we are already doing, but we're not doing it enough, and that is the desalination of acid mine drainage. There's a significant amount of AMD flow into the Vaal River system. It's well documented in the Vaal River salinity study that was published by the department a couple of years ago. The biggest source of salinity in the Vaal River is non-point source pollution from the mining industry. So there's a major AMD contributor to salinity. But if you go into the Mpumalanga coalfields, there are some substantial desalination plants there that are taking the worst quality AMD you can think of, have been doing it for the last decade, and producing potable quality water from it without, I'm not aware of one human health impact that it's had. I'm not aware of one public issue that has come back or with any substance to it. So we've got a proven track record of desalination. So if you're going for the first low-hanging fruit, which is about recovery of water from waste, it's not a very big jump to the second one, which is about desalination of your mine water. And in fact, you can combine those two together. Where appropriate, for example, on the East Rand, the West Rand, and the Central Rand, where there's an appropriate wastewater works close by, you can quite easily combine your AMD flows with that wastewater recovery. So there's a natural synergy there, and it's going to kill two birds with one stone by preventing pollution. As Hamanth said, we don't dilute pollution. We have been up to now diluting pollution, but what we should actually do is prevent it. And then once we've done those first two steps now, the second step logically flows from the first step, but then the third step logically comes from the second step, and that is the large-scale desalination of seawater along all our coastal cities. So it's a simple, it's like a technology rollout roadmap that I've just given now, and it's completely incremental, completely logical, completely doable. In fact, if we don't do it, we're going to be in trouble. And it's just a question of how do we actually sell that idea? How do we get buy-in at all different levels of society? But this is something that we need to do. So those are my three low-hanging fruits.
Thanks, Tony. Benoit, do you have another comment on desalination? Have we lost Benoit there for a minute?
No, he's got that blank look in his eyes.
I don't think he's heard us. I think he may have lost sound there for a minute.
Something's happening. Benoit, are you with us?
Yeah. I think my bandwidth is. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We saw you had that blank look, and we just realized you lost us there for a minute. We just wanted to see if you had another comment on desalination further to what Anthony just shared.
Yeah, you see, globally, desalination is growing at 8 to 9%, and that is forecast at least until the end of this decade. That's the data that we have, and that's public data. It's very robust data, and so desalination is seen as economical and as absolutely no-brainer. On the pollution side of things, one of the big drivers of membranes, of the growth in the membrane market, is in actual fact the reuse of water. And there's very few countries who reuse water into the potable side of things. So generally speaking, that's going to add to it also. And in South Africa, we've been doing it for quite a long time. We're quite good at it, as Tony has said in the coal fields. But also, if you look at the pollution side, the Department of Water Sanitation has made it's a policy, and it's an actionable item at the moment that from January this year, 36 months hence, our pollution load in our water resources will be reduced by 60%. Okay, and people have been appointed, and that is supposed to be in action. So we're going to have to monitor that very carefully and have a look at every 6 months how we're actually doing. And that pollution is angled mostly at the municipalities. So the only way for them to be able to sort out the issues with the antiquated assets is to go the reuse route, so that the assets can be refurbished at the same time and upgraded. And then, yes, order of magnitude less, as Tony has said, is the acid mine drainage side of things, where there's 600 megalitres a day of it. But the desal, apart from AMD, is 1,600 megalitres a day that we are planning to do. And the only movement we see is in eThekwini and in the city of Cape Town. We need to get everybody moving out of this paralysis and getting the desalination going. So we sort out two things. We sort out the pollution issues, and we actually get a fairly sustainable yield, because we know what the yield is from acid mine drainage. And in the sea, the sea levels are going up, not down, and we are not going to drain the sea very quickly. And right now, it's the cheapest water you can get, and you don't have to store it anywhere. You take it straight out of the sea, you process it, and an hour later, you put it into the reticulation system, into the reservoir, the concrete reservoirs, which are fairly small. And they've got 48 hours, supposed to have 48 hours of storage. So it's fairly small. You don't have to put it into a dam where it evaporates, So it looks like we have political will. We definitely have the technology. And we have a hell of a nice industrialization opportunity to take care of. And I just can't wait for us to get starting. So we're going to be knocking on the minister's door very soon, because it's the end of April, and we have to have that NIP 2050 kickstarted and the likes. And I'm glad we're going to have it going. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And watch this space. The chamber is very active there. And, look, it's a serious game, and I really believe we're going to get it right.
Some positivity for the win. Can we have a roundup? Hamanth, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you very much, Getty. Yep, if I can comment on the desal aspect, desalination is, of course, appropriate on the coast in the first instance. The costs have come down substantially over the last 20 years. So it's still not as cheap as conventional water treatment, but the costs are fast coming down. The good news with desal is it's no longer considered as innovative or groundbreaking. It's an established technology. So to put in a desal plant it's a basis of establishing if the modalities are in place and we can start producing the water that we require. My own view is I think we should go the desal route, yes, where it's necessary, especially in the coastal regions, right? At the same time, we shouldn't ignore the non-revenue water issue, because there lies a huge amount of savings, because putting in more and more desal and not solving the leaks simply means that you're using the same pipeline infrastructure in some instances with the desalinated water going down the drain. So I do believe that the non-revenue water is an important one. I'm also confident that South Africans are capable of overcoming this challenge. Yes, we have a huge backlog. The challenge is unprecedented. Let us not fool ourselves for what we're in for here. It's not going to happen overnight. You are not going to be able to fix 500 wastewater treatment works in 1 year's time in order for you to reduce your pollution load by 50%. That's not going to happen. I would love for it to happen, but that's not the reality on the ground. So we're going to need to become very innovative in the way we do things. And lastly, we will have to focus on sustainability, because there are many solutions out there, most of which are not sustainable, and we can scarcely afford white elephants at this point in time in South Africa with this challenge that we have on our hands. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anthony, a final roundup from yourself?
Yeah, I think that I choose to be optimistic about these things, and I think that we find in this new minister a willing partner for us as a water chamber. That's my perspective. In fact, I just give you a little story. I did a media briefing about 10 days ago, and I mentioned something about Bloemwater or Bloemfontein. And 2 days later, I was contacted by the CEO of Bloemwater, and he told me that he'd been instructed by the minister to contact me, to reach out to me, to find out what the issue was so that it could be resolved. That tells me that the minister's listening to what we say. It tells me that he's proactive. There was no aggression. There was no finger pointing. It was, if you think there's a problem, let's talk about it. How can we solve this problem? So I think there's a very, very good attitude that's now starting to emerge from the leadership of the department. And we also have another good news story in the sense that we now have a DG. We have a permanent DG, the first for a long time. So these are two quite significant developments in the water sector in the recent past. Yes, things are bad. Yes, things are broken. But I think we've reached rock bottom. I don't know. Hopefully we have reached rock bottom. Hopefully we can now turn it around. So at this point in time, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not prepared to gush and to be overly enthusiastic about it, because I did that when Nomvula Mokonyane was made minister, and she then proceeded to plunder and rob and steal and break the department. So I will reserve my judgment for later on. But that's my view. I'm about to be wiped out by a big thunderstorm here, so I'm going to have to probably go offline.
We had a thunderstorm here last night of note. I thought I was in Johannesburg for a few minutes. Benoit, final roundup from you.
By the way, I got a phone call from Bloem this morning. They're asking me when's the water coming on. So I said I don't know. So they've been out for quite a long time. It's crazy for a metro not to have water. And I'd like to think we have hit rock bottom. I don't think we have. I think we're still on. There's nothing visible that's actually been done in the ground. So Public Works announced last week that 100% of the projects are delayed, and Public Works is overarching. So it's from SANRAL right through. And I do know in SANRAL a lot of projects have been awarded these last 2 months. So it's starting to happen. The water sector, it hasn't started happening. And but the team in the water sector is being rebuilt, and I see energy in their team, which to me, instead, of actors, because they're all in acting positions and being demoralized and not being able to do anything because they didn't have leadership, weren't too sure, and the likes. That's all they re-energize. So to me, that's really good. But I think we're going to see some major pollution events still taking place, and major outages in Joburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane. They're increasing, they're not decreasing, because nothing's been done. And I think we're going to go down that route. We know what to do to fix it. And I think it's the model that gets put on the table, and the models from the private sector, and how we can mesh it into the supply chains of government. So the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, and that we have the governance, as Hamanth is talking about, that governance does not get tainted with, but we have to speed up the process and not slow it down. And I know the major water utilities at the moment, one of their problems is that they're too scared to go out to tender because they don't want to be accused of lapses of governance. So we've got this paralysis at the moment. So I think we're going to go down a little bit more and then start picking up as we start getting some traction. And what we have to do is celebrate, that traction that we get. But we've got to collaborate whilst we push and hold everybody accountable and carry on like this. And I think 6 months down the line, we'll start seeing the situation changing, where some projects, apart from the Lesotho Highlands, that is carrying on, but some projects that are starting to happen, where raising of the Clan William Dam, we're still waiting for it. They still haven't done the EIAs, they still haven't appropriated all the properties, and this thing's been going on for 10 years. Luckily, it's not going to be done by the state construction company, because that doesn't exist anymore, and it's not going to exist. So I think we have to live through the frustrations, become a little bit more innovative. But we have the solutions, we have the political will now, and it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of forcing municipalities to start doing their work. And to me, that's where the focus goes. We've got the policy and institutional stuff sorted now to a great extent. We can move forward and watch the NIP 2050. It has to be gazetted, but it's been approved by the cabinet. And I think after that, there's no excuse not to do things in our sector. And if you look at already with the NIP 2050, the bandwidth issue with telecoms is already being auctioned, and that's happening. So it's going to happen in the water. So I'm also cautiously optimistic, but we can't fail. We just can't fail this country.
Totally have to agree with you. Failure is not an option. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. To our viewers, thank you. If you've got any topics you'd like us to cover in future, please feel free to put those in the comments as well. Thanks, everyone. Hamanth, thank you. Anthony, thank you. Benoit, thank you. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode. And Fred Platt has joined us in the comments. He says, execution is key, and this can only be done through partnerships. And I'm sure Fred will join us on the next episode. Thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll see you on the next Water Hour.
Thank you.